Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be scripting the Jump Shop GUI. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn this post notifications on if you want to get notified whenever I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this video. There's a link down below in the description, and you guys can go and check that out. With that being said, let's get right into it. Now, before we hop into studio, we actually want to go down below in the description of this video and click the link that actually takes you to the free model assets that are on my Patreon. Now, you guys have probably downloaded this before, but we've added more assets to this recently, so you're going to want to re-download this. Once again, just to make sure you guys understand correctly, this Patreon post can be accessed by everybody. It's completely free, and you guys can all use the models and assets that are included inside of this file. Once you've downloaded that zip file, you guys are going to want to extract it, and then you can actually upload the individual models to Roblox Studio. Now, we've only added one model to this pack, so I only have to upload one. If you guys are unfamiliar with how to upload models into Roblox, all we're going to do is we're going to right-click on Workspace, click Insert from File, select wherever that file was, and then you should see it gets added directly to your workspace. Now, we can't exactly see it because our GUI is in the way. What we're going to do is we're going to go to View, click on UI Visibility right here, and now that'll just toggle all of our GUIs off so we can actually just see the model for right now. Now, like I said, there are other models included in the pack, but the only one that we're going to be using in this video is the Jump Shop. Now, if we actually look at the Jump Shop model, we can actually expand it and look at it. Inside of here, we have just my character who looks a little cool. We also have a floor. We also have some light cubes, and we have a GUI in here as well, which says buy double jumps here. And then we also have a part called Hitbox, which is basically just a large square, and this part is actually going to be used for when a player touches it, and that'll open up the GUI. Now, you might be thinking, shouldn't this part be invisible? Why are we able to see it? If we look up, that's actually how a lot of the stuff is that we're doing right now. A lot of these parts should be hidden, and when we actually release and publish the game, we will hide them. You could even hide them right now, for example, but I'm leaving them visible so that we can see how our things are currently set up. The reason that I'm explaining this to you is because this hitbox part is important, as well as the name of this model. You do not want to rename this. Just make sure you leave the name as Jump Space Shop, and make sure that you have a hitbox part inside of that model as well. Now, what we're going to actually want to do with this model is we're going to want to set this up for all of the individual islands. If you guys are unfamiliar, in clicking Simulator, they actually have a jump shop available at every single island, so that's what we want to do. They also have a jump shop set up in Spawn as well, so we're also going to add that to here as well. So what we're going to do is we have the jump shop model right here. All we're going to do is drag and drop it directly into our Spawn folder right here, and inside of the Spawn folder, we have a ton of the other models, which make up this little Spawn area right here. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this by hitting Control D, and then we're going to cut it by hitting Control X. Then we're going to go into the islands folder, and let's first start with the forest folder. So we're going to paste this directly inside of there by hitting Control Shift and V, and that pastes it directly inside the folder. Now we have to move the model a little bit, so let's go ahead and move that up to the forest island right up here. And of course, you can reposition it however you want to, but I think that actually looks pretty decent. It's touching the ground and everything like that. So then what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this once again, and you can drag and drop this if you want to into the next island folder, or you can cut it and paste it, whatever you want to do. But then we're going to bring this up to the next island, which is the Arctic island right up here. Now, one thing that's actually included in all of our islands except for the forest island is a part called Jump Shop Hitbox. And what we're going to do is we're actually just going to delete the part. We were originally going to use this specific part for opening the Jump Shop GUI, but instead of using that, I went with a different method, and we're going to be using this model, which has a part inside of it called Hitbox, which I prefer. So that's why we're going to go ahead and delete the part called Jump Shop Hitbox in all the different islands. So let's also make sure that we do that for the volcano island as well, just like that. And there we go. Now we have one more island. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the Jump Shop once again. We're going to bring it up to the volcano island right here, position that nicely, and then we're going to put that inside of the volcano folder just like that, and there we go. So just to recap, we now have the Jump Shop model set up in all three of the different islands, and then we also have one set up in the Spawn right down here. Now that we have those models set up, we can pretty much start scripting. So let's go back to the View tab and click on UI Visibility so we can see the UI once again. Then we want to go inside of the Star GUI, and we actually want to rename the Jump Shop GUI from Jump Shop to Jumps Shop. So we want to make the word jump plural. The reason we're doing this is because inside of our server script service, we already have a module script called Jumps Shop, so we want to make sure that we keep our naming scheme the same in all the different places. Now that we've renamed the GUI, we can kind of close those things. We actually want to go inside of the replicated storage, open up our configs folder, and open up the jumps module script. Now, the way that our config is currently set up is basically every single jump has a price, but we actually want to do something a little bit different, and we want to modify this a little bit so that not only will we get the price for each individual jump, we also want to create some other variables for every single jump as well. So what we're going to do is where we say 1 equals 0, we're actually going to turn this into a table, and then we're going to say price equals 0, just like that. And then we can do that for all of these. So we'll once again do that right here, and we'll say price equals 150,000, and then we'll do that for 12 million as well. So price equals 12 million, just like that. Now, like I said, we want to add some more information to this as well. To demonstrate the information that we want to add to each of the individual jumps, I'm going to show this by going into my jumps GUI, and now I've selected the icon right here. Now, in clicking Simulator, the icons that are displayed for each jump jump actually are a different color. So you have a couple of different options. One of your options is to make an image outside of Roblox and create a different variant of that image with all of the different colors, and then upload all those images to Roblox and then use each of those individual images. In my opinion, that's not the greatest solution. An alternative to that would actually be modifying the image color property of the image, and then that'll actually adjust the color of the icon. So for instance, if we select this right here, we can actually play around with this color, and when we make this a bright green, it actually makes the image a little bit of a dark green. And the reason that it does that is because it basically modifies the color of the actual image. So considering this is light blue, when we try to turn that to a light green, it turns it to a dark green, and that's just because of color blending and stuff like that. But anyway, the reason that I'm showing you this is because this is actually one of the variables that we want to create for each of the individual jumps. So for each of the individual jumps, we want to add a property to their table along with the price property called image color, and then we want to set it to a specific color. So for instance, one of the colors we will actually want to have as 255, 255, 255, because that's the default image color, and that'll make this blue. And then maybe for another color, we want 221, 255, and 0, because that makes us a little bit green. If we go over to the dark blue, then we want 0, 34, and 255, and then we can keep playing around with the colors, and that's how we're going to do our colors here. So anyways, we're going to hop back inside of our jumps config, and let's go ahead and add a brand new property to the first jump. Like I said, this property is going to be called image color, and that's actually going to be a color3.fromRGB. And for right now, let's just say 255, 255, 255, because that'll be white, so that'll actually be the default blue. And then we want to add this property to the rest of the jumps as well. So let's go ahead and put a comma there, and then for jumps 2, we'll add that to there, and then we'll do the same thing for jumps 3. And now let's actually start changing the colors. So these colors might not look great, or they might not be too different, but the reason that I'm just doing this is to show you guys the example of how we would do this. Now that we've got that property set up, we actually want to add another property to this, and we probably don't want to add this property to the first or the second jump, because this property is actually going to be called island, and that's going to be set to a string, which is the name of an island. So for example, forest. And what we're actually going to do with this property is we're basically saying that the player needs to unlock this specific island before they're able to purchase this specific jump. So I'm going to quickly modify these prices a little bit just so that we can easily test this stuff out, and we're actually going to add a couple more jumps. So I'm going to copy 3, and then we're going to change this to 4. We'll set the price to 500. We'll move the color over a little bit more, and then we'll also set the island to forest as well. Now let's make number 5. Let's set the price to 750. Let's move the color over a little bit more. And now instead of saying forest island, we actually want them to unlock the Arctic island to be able to get this jump. So let's do that one more time. We'll say 6. This will cost 1,000. We'll change the color again, make it a little bit of a darker blue. And then for this jump, we'll also require the Arctic island to be unlocked as well. Okay, so now that we have our config all set up, we actually need to update all the scripts which use this jumps config because we modified it a little bit. Now, luckily for us, the only script that actually uses this currently is the jump shop module script inside of the server script service. So let's go ahead and open up that. Inside of this module script, we have a variable called next jump price. That's equal to jumps config.config, and then we index that with the specific jump. Now what we need to do is we actually need to say .price so that we actually get its price. And now another thing that we actually need to add to this is we actually need to add checking if the player has the island unlocked. So what we want to do is where we actually get the jumps config, we also want to get the islands config as well. So we're going to say islands, and then we'll say islands config. Then underneath of our next jump variable, we actually want to create another variable called required island, and that's going to be equal to jumps config.config, index that with the next jump, and then index that with island. Then we're going to say if requires island, because remember, not all of our jumps require an island to be unlocked, and not islands config dot is island unlocked, and then we want to pass through the profile.data and the required island. Then, so if there is a required island and that island is not unlocked, what we want to do is we want to return you must unlock the, and then we'll add the required island just like that, and then we'll say island first exclamation mark. So if the island does have a requirement and the player does not have that island unlocked, then we just want to stop the function right here and tell the player, hey, you must unlock the island first. Okay, so now we're pretty much done with the server side of stuff because we already created this function a couple of videos ago. So now we can close that out and we can pretty much start working on scripting this entire GUI. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, and we're going to make a brand new local script. Of course, we're going to rename this to jumps shop, and then we need to get a couple of variables. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside of the portal's local script, and I'm just going to grab a bunch of these variables right here because we pretty much recreate these variables every single time. So let's go ahead, grab them, and put them inside of the jump shop script. Now looking at our variables, we got the format number, we got the state manager, we got the islands config. Let's go ahead and also add the jumps config to this as well. So we're going to grab that, rename that variable. There we go. We got the jumps config. Then for the GUI variable, we want to say wait for child jumps shop, just like that. And then we can start creating some more variables for this specific GUI. So we're going to delete the template variable, and the first variable that we're going to create is called frame, and that's going to be equal to GUI.frame. Then we're going to go ahead and create a variable for the container, and that's going to be equal to frame.container. And then we also want to make a variable for the info frame, so that's going to be equal to frame.info. Then of course we have our button, so let's go ahead and create a variable called exit, and that's going to be for the exit button, which is frame.exit. Now also inside of the info frame, we have a button called buy, and we want to create a variable for that. So we're going to say local buy equals info.buy. Just like that. And then we want to create a variable for the template, and that template is actually inside of the container. So .template, and there we go. Next, what we want to do is start creating a couple of different constant variables. Now, let's go ahead and look at our GUI and think about the different constants that we want to create. So for instance, if we look inside of the container and we actually look at the template right here, we can see some text at the bottom that says x2 double jumps. And we also say the same thing over here as well. So we can actually use that constant that we create for both right here and for right there. Inside of the info frame, we actually have a little frame right here, which displays x3. And we're going to want to create a variable for that as well. Now, another thing to consider is if we go into view and we go into our asset manager and we look at our images, inside of our template for the icon, we actually want to display either the lock icon or we want to display the jump icon. So we want to display either of these two images. So we're going to want to create a constant variable for the IDs for both of these images as well. And then another thing to consider, let's go ahead and copy the ID for this lock, and then let's change the image to that real quick. So there we go. Now, another thing to consider is that we actually want this lock to appear in black. We don't want there to really be any color. So we're also going to want to create a constant for the image color of this lock as well. Now I'm going to undo that and leave it as the default jump icon, but I just wanted to show you guys that real quick. Another thing to consider is inside of the info frame, we have the buy button right here. Now, when a player has not purchased the jump and they select that jump, we want this button to display buy now and be green. But if a player has actually purchased this jump, we actually want the button to appear as a little bit blue. And then we want to change the title text in here to say purchased, just like that. And then we also want to change the title text in here to say owned, just like that. So we're going to need to create variables for both of the different text and then also both of the different colors. But I think that covers all the constant variables. Now, hopefully the way I did it this time, where I actually showed you all the different things that we're considering and all the different things that we're creating constants for, it makes it a little bit easier to understand. I felt like if I just created all the constants inside of the script and told you what they were for, you might be confused and it really might not paint a good picture for you. Anyways, with that being said, let's go ahead and start creating the constants. So the first constant that we're going to be creating is called item underscore purchasable, and that's going to be equal to X amount in all uppercase, double jumps, just like that. And like I said, that constant is this one right here, or even this one too. Next, we'll create a constant called info underscore amount, and that's going to be equal to X amount in all caps, which if once again we look at our workspace, that is this one right here. Then we actually want to go ahead and open up our asset manager because we're going to need to get both the jump icon and the lock icon ID. So let's go ahead and copy that. And then we'll go ahead and create constants for both of those as well. So we're going to say local item icon equals, and then this string right here. And then let's go ahead and grab that lock icon ID, and then we'll create a variable for that as well. So lock underscore icon equals, and then that string right there. Then we'll create another variable called lock underscore icon underscore color, and that's going to be equal to color3.from RGB. And then we actually want to make this a black, so we're going to set that to 000, and now that's the black color. Then we can start creating some constants for the buy button. So we're going to say local buy underscore button underscore text underscore default. So this is what the buy button should look like by default whenever a player is able to purchase the item. And the text should say buy now, just like that. Then we're going to duplicate this variable, and instead of saying default, we actually want to say owned, and that's going to be equal to owned, just like that. And now we have to create some constants for the text button color. So we're going to say local buy underscore button underscore color underscore default, and that's going to be equal to a color3.from RGB. And by default, we want the button to appear green. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to duplicate this variable, and instead of saying default, we want to say owned. And then like I said, when it's owned, we want it to appear as a blue color, so we're going to do that. And now we've pretty much created all of our constants. So let's script the easiest thing first, and that's the exit button, as we always do. So we'll say exit.mouse button one click, connect that to an anonymous function, and all we're going to do is we're going to say GUI enabled equals false, just like that. Next, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new function, and this is going to be called generate openers. Now, what this function is actually going to do is we're going to call this function one time when the player first joins the game, and it's going to find all the jump shot models in our workspace, and it's basically going to set up listening to that hitbox touched event, and then it's going to open the GUI for us whenever we touch that specific part. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for underscore comma descendant in workspace get descendants do. Then we want to say if descendant dot name does not equal jump space shop, then continue end. So if the descendant that we find isn't the jump shop model that we want, then we're just going to continue through the for loop. Then let's go ahead and create a brand new variable called Hitbox. That's going to be of the part type, and that's actually going to be equal to descendant, find first child, and then we're going to look for a part named Hitbox, just like that. Then once we get that part, we're going to say hitbox.touched, and we're going to connect that to an anonymous function. This anonymous function is going to accept the other part. Then we want to go ahead and create a variable for the player, and that's going to be equal to players get player from character, and we want to pass through the other part dot parent. And now we want to say if player and player equals player, so the local player, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to enable the GUI, so we're going to set that to true. So now whenever we touch the hitbox, it's going to enable the GUI and be visualized on our screen. Now, of course, whenever we're listening to any touched event, we always want to make a debounce. So what we're going to do up here is create a variable called debounce, and that's going to be equal to false. Then where we actually enable the GUI, what we want to do is we want to say debounce, and we want to actually set that to true. Then we want to use task.delay, and we're going to wait 0.5 seconds, and then we'll make an anonymous function inside of here, and then we're going to say debounce equals false. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to set a cooldown of 0.5 seconds so that whenever a player touches the part, they're not being spammed with the GUI being enabled, and there's a slight cooldown to that. We need to do one more thing with the debounce though. Right here where we check if the player and if the player is equal to the local player, we actually want to say if not debounce and the rest of that. So there we go. And the reason that we're doing this is because by default, debounce should be set to false, and whenever the cooldown is off, it will also be set to false as well, and then whenever we're on cooldown, it'll be set to true. So that's why we're saying if not debounce. Now let's make sure that we call this function, so we're going to say generate openers, and let's start our game and test this out. When we go into our game, the GUI is already open. We can go ahead and click the exit button that we just scripted. We can see that that works. Let's go ahead, go over to this one right here, and we can see that this jump shop is working. It opens the GUI. Let's close it and open it again, and yeah, that is working perfectly. So great, we know that that's working. Next, what we're going to do is create a function above the generate openers, and this is going to be called generate item, and this is going to accept an argument called jump, which is of course going to be a number. Now what we want to do inside of here is we're going to create a variable called clone, and that's going to be equal to template, and we're going to clone that template. Then we want to actually make sure that we parent that to the container. We also want to rename it to the specific jump, and then we also want to make sure that we make it visible as well, so we're going to set the visibility to true. Then if we open up the GUI and we actually look at the template, we have this title text label right here, which is this text label right here. So we actually want to modify that text label, so we're going to say clone.title.text, and we want to set that to the item purchasable, and we want to call the gsub method on that, and we want to replace the word amount with the number of the specific jump. Now on top of that, what we also want to do is we want to listen to the mouse button one click, and we want to connect that to an anonymous function. And we're not going to do anything with this yet, but in a little bit we're actually going to basically make this item appear in the info frame and set all of that stuff up. So we're just going to comment this out for right now and say select item and leave that for right now. So this is the first function that we're basically going to call when the script starts up, and we can actually do that. Let's go below where we actually call the jump openers function, and what we want to do is we want to loop through the jumps config. So we're going to say for jump comma props in jumps config do, and then we want to call the generate item function, and we want to pass through the jump. So basically this is going to go through all the jumps that are currently in the config, and it's going to call the generate item function for all of the individual jumps. Now above the generate item function, we want to create another function, and it's going to be called update item, and that's going to accept a jump, which is of course going to be a number. Now with this function, what we actually want to do is we want to create a variable called clone, and what we're going to do with this is we're actually going to look inside of the container for a child named the specific jump. So we create it in the generate item function and we rename it. So that's how we're going to find the specific text button that we created in the generate item function. Next, we also want to create a variable called config, and that's going to be equal to jumpsconfig.config and index that with the specific jump. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually set the icon image to the item icon constant that we have up there. And then we also want to adjust the image color as well. So we're going to say clone.icon.imageColor3, and that's going to be equal to config.imageColor. Then we want to create a variable called isPurchased, and that's going to be equal to stateManager.getData.jumps. And if that number is greater than or equal to the specific jump, then that would mean that that jump has already been purchased. So then we'll say clone.purchased.visible equals is purchased. So that little check mark at the top left, if the jump has been purchased, we want to set that to be visible. Otherwise, we don't want that to be visible if the player has not purchased that jump already. Now that we've set the purchase to be visible, we also want to set the title text label to be visible as well. So we're going to set that to true. Then we want to create a variable called island requirement. And of course, that's going to be equal to config.island. And then we want to check if there actually is an island requirement. And if there is an island requirement, what we want to do is we want to create a variable called isRequirementUnlocked. And that's going to be equal to the island config config.island unlocked, and we want to pass through the state manager.get data and the specific island requirement as well. Then we want to say if the island requirement is not unlocked, then we want to do something. And what do we want to do? Well, we want to update the icon image, and we actually want to set that to the lock icon. We also want to adjust the icon image color now as well. So we're going to say color 3, and that's going to be equal to the lock icon color. Since it is locked, we also need to set the title visibility to false because we don't want to see that. And we want to do the same thing for the purchased image label as well. We want to set the visibility of that to false as well, just like that. So what we're doing in this function is we're basically setting all the stuff up here as if it's not locked. Then once we get down to here, we're actually checking if it can be locked because it needs a requirement. And if it should be locked, then we're basically going to reset all the stuff up here, and we're going to set all the stuff to how it should look when the jump is locked. Now, right underneath of this function, we actually want to create another function called update items. That's going to accept no arguments, and all we're going to do is we're going to loop through the jumps config once again. So we're going to say for jump props in jumps config.config do, and then we want to call the update item function and pass through the jump just like that. So let's go a little bit further down in our script, and this right here is where we actually generate all of our items. We could turn this into a function. We could literally create a function called generate items and then just do that inside of here and then just call that function. But rather than doing that, we're just going to do the for loop right there, and then after that for loop's done, what we're going to do is we're going to call update items. So first we're going to generate all the items, and then after they're all generated, we're going to update all of them with how they actually should look. So now that we're calling that function, let's go ahead and start up our game, test this out, and see how things look currently. So hopping directly into our game, we can see all of these things have been generated. We can ignore this first jump right here. The reason that that's there is because that's the default template, which we have not set the visibility of. So normally you won't see this one. But for instance, we see the first jump, and then we see the second jump, and then we see locks over all of these other ones. And the reason that we see the locks is because we don't have the forest or the Arctic Island unlocked, so we're not able to purchase those. With that being said, though, it is looking good, so let's go ahead and continue through scripting it. What we want to do is start scripting the actual info frame, so whenever a player clicks on a jump, it'll update the info frame and allow the player to purchase that jump if they should be able to. Going to the top of the script, right below where we create the debounce variable, let's go ahead and create a new variable called selected jump, and that's going to be equal to nil by default because we don't want there to be any value. Then scrolling down a little bit, right above our generate item function, let's go ahead and create a brand new function called select item, which is going to accept an argument called jump, and of course that's going to be a number. Now, once we actually call this function, what we want to do is we want to set the selected jump variable to the specific jump right there. Then we want to go ahead and create the same config variable that we made above. So we're going to say jumps config.config and index that with the specific jump. Then we want to check if there is an island requirement. So we're going to say local island requirement, and that's going to be equal to config.island. Now, if there is an island requirement, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to check if the island requirement is unlocked. So is requirement unlocked, and of course that's equal to the island config dot is island unlocked, pass through the state manager dot get data and the specific island requirement. And if the island requirement is not unlocked, then we just want to return end and stop the function right there. So the reason that we're doing this is because whenever a player clicks on a locked item, we don't want to update the info frame with anything because they're not able to purchase that item, so we don't even want to make it visible there. So in a way, we're kind of doing the reverse of what we do in the update item function. Rather than doing all the unlock stuff first and then setting the lock stuff, we're first handling the lock stuff, and then down here is where we'll handle if the item is actually unlocked or not. So now that we know that the item is unlocked, we want to go ahead and start making adjustments to the info frame. So we're going to say info.title.text, and we want to set that to the item purchasable, call gsub on it, replace that with amount, and replace it with a specific jump. Then we want to go inside of the icon background frame, and then we want to set the image of the icon image label to the item icon. And then we're going to duplicate this, and because this time we actually want to change the image color, and we want to change that to config.imageColor. Then again, inside of the info frame, we want to go inside of the jumps background, and we want to adjust the text of the amount label to info amount, gsub on that, and we want to replace the word amount with the jumps. And now we need to do the same thing for the cost background. So we're going to say info.cost background, get the amount text label and change the text. And we want to actually set the text to format number, format compact, config.price. And now we actually want to check if it has been purchased. So we're going to say local is purchased. And that's of course going to be equal to state manager.getData.jumps. And if it's greater than or equal to the current jump. So now based on if it is or if it's not purchased, we want to update the buy button. So we can say buy.title.text equals, if it is purchased, then the text should display the buy button text owned. Otherwise, it should display buy button text default. And now along with that, we also have to do the same thing for the background color 3 here. So if is purchased, then buy button color owned, else buy button color default, just like that. So now we're pretty much done with this function, but we actually have to call this function. And where do we want to do that? Well, right here, when we actually generate the item, we want to call the select item function, and we want to pass through the jump just like that. Now let's go ahead, start up our game, and test this out. So once we get into our game, we can click on the first jump, and we can see that the buy button does update. It says own now. The color is changed, and the reason that says that is because we already own the first jump by default. When we click on the second jump, we see buy now, the cost, the price, the icon, everything else like that. So everything is updating correctly whenever we select a specific jump. Now, one thing that we can do to make this a little bit nicer is after we basically generate all of the items and then we update all the items, let's actually call select item, and let's just pass through the first jump by default. So basically, the first time that the player opens up the GUI in the game, the info frame will display the first jump just so that we have some default data displayed in there and it looks normal. Now that we've done that, we actually have to script the buy button. Whenever a player clicks it, of course, they want to buy a jump, so we have to do that. So we're going to say buy.mouse button one click, connect that to an anonymous function. And what we want to do is we want to say if selected jump, then, and then we'll go into the remotes, and then we'll call the purchase jump remote event that we already created. So we'll say fire server, and we'll fire server with the selected jump just like that. Now, another thing that we want to do is every time a player purchases a jump or unlocks a brand new island, we want to update all the items in our GUI to reflect that. So we're going to go inside a remotes folder, and we want to listen to the purchase jump remote event, connect that, and we're going to connect that to an anonymous function, which accepts a jump, which is of course a number. And then what we want to do is we want to call task.delay. We want to wait 0 seconds, once again, make an anonymous function, and then we want to call update items, and then we also need to update the info frame, so we're going to call select item, and then we're going to call that on the specific jump as well. So update items will update all of the items inside of the container frame, and then we're calling select item to also update the info frame display as well. Now, like I said, we also want to update all of the items whenever a player unlocks a brand new island, so we're going to say update island.onClient event, connect that to an anonymous function. This function is going to accept an island, which is a string, and unlocked, which is a boolean, and then we're going to say if unlocked, then once again task.delay 0, and then we're going to call the update items function just like that. Now, if you guys are confused at all by the task.delay, the reason that we're doing this is because of how our state manager works. If you guys are confused by that, go check out the state manager episode where we created all that, and you guys should be able to understand it from there. With that being said, we're pretty much done with scripting all the stuff. Let's go ahead and actually set the visibility of the template to false by default. Then let's also set the GUI to no longer be enabled, start up the game, and test this out. Now, I realized we made one mistake while creating this. If we actually go to the select item function, we can see right here is requirement unlocked, and then we're saying if the island is unlocked, then we actually want to just return end. Instead of that, what we actually want to say is if the island is not unlocked, then we want to stop the function right here. So once again, let's go back into our game and test this out. Once we enter our game, let's just go ahead and give ourselves a bunch of clicks real quick. Let's go ahead, go over, get the shop GUI open. Now let's go ahead, buy the second jump. There we go. We've bought that. Let's go ahead and go over to this island, unlock that island. Now we can see that we can purchase 2 more jumps, and we can actually click on them, and we can see that we're able to buy them now as well. So let's click on buy now. That worked. Cool. We can buy that jump as well. Let's close the GUI, see if we can open it here. We can open it here, which is great. Let's go ahead and unlock the Arctic island, and now we can see that we have 2 more jumps that we're able to buy now as well. So that means that everything is working perfectly. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you guys did, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn this post notifications on if you want to get notified whenever I upload more Roblox development content. I also have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and get access to all the scripts in the game file that I made during this episode. There's a link down below the description, and you guys are going to check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.